Rain swept across Halifax in soft, slanting waves, blurring the harbor lights into shimmering ribbons of gold. Inside the rooftop restaurant called Harbor Sky, warmth gathered like breath against the windows. Conversations rose and fell in low, steady rhythms. A jazz trio played near the bar, their music blending with the sound of glass and silverware. It was the kind of night that made the city feel half asleep, half alive. Clara Whitmore stepped out of the elevator and paused, straightening the collar of her gray coat. Her phone buzzed in her hand, the last email still open on the screen. The board at Northlight Media wanted her to realign her image. The phrase hung in her head like a question with no answer. Realign, as if she were a product that had gone slightly off-brand. She slipped the phone into her bag and followed the host through a maze of tables. The restaurant was full, glowing with a kind of curated intimacy. Couples leaned close across candlelight. Tourists raised their glasses to the skyline. A few executives scrolled through phones between courses. Clara walked past them all, her heels soft against the marble. The host stopped at a small table by the window. A man and a young girl were seated there, a single candle flickering beside a plate of half-eaten chocolate cake. "Here we are, Bayertsford," the host said cheerfully. Clara smiled politely and sat down before realizing the man wasn't waiting for her at all. He blinked, surprised but not unfriendly, a fork suspended halfway to his mouth. The little girl looked from her father to Clara, curious. The host, oblivious, placed a menu in front of her and walked away. For a moment, silence filled the space. Clara straightened, feeling heat rise to her face. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "This isn't table 12, is it?" The man smiled, slow and calm. "No, this is 9, but you're already here, so maybe it's meant to be." His voice had an ease that unsettled her. She wasn't used to ease. "I must have the wrong table," she said, half standing. He gestured towards the chair. "Maybe not. We've got cake, and my daughter insists it's bad luck to eat alone on your birthday." Clara hesitated. Her instinct was to leave, to correct the mistake, to return to her world of polished control. But the small warmth in his tone stopped her. The girl smiled shyly, holding out a fork. "It's his birthday," she said. "You can have some if you want." Clara's shoulders softened. She exhaled and sat down again. "You're very persuasive," she told the child. "She gets that from her mom," the man said, then paused, his eyes briefly shadowed. "I'm Noah. This is Elena." "Clara," she said, taking his offered hand. His grip was firm, his palm warm. "Happy birthday, Noah." "Thanks. Didn't expect a guest tonight." He smiled easily, the kind of smile that seemed to steady the air around him. "Are you in Halifax for business?" She gave a faint laugh. "Always, I'm afraid. It's a terrible habit." Elena tilted her head. "Do you like cake?" Clara smiled at her directness. "I used to." "Then you still do," the girl said with certainty, pushing the plate toward her. "Daddy made it." Clara picked up the fork, took a small bite, and blinked. "That's really good," she said, surprised. "Secret ingredient's patience," Noah replied. "And maybe a little courage." Clara laughed softly. It felt unfamiliar, the sound of it. The rain beat gently against the window, and the glow of the city reflected in their glasses. The air between them began to loosen. They talked about simple things: the rain, the view, the way the harbor lights looked like stars fallen into water. She learned he taught culinary arts at a local college, and had been raising his daughter alone since his wife's passing 4 years earlier. He learned she ran a large media company, though she didn't say which one. When she finally admitted it, Northlight, he nodded slowly. "I remember Northlight," he said. "I used to work for a paper they bought. We didn't make it through the merger." Clara felt her stomach tighten. "That was before I became CEO," she said quietly. He nodded again. "Doesn't matter. I guess life keeps moving." But it did matter. His tone wasn't bitter, only factual, and somehow that stung more. She wanted to say she was sorry, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she asked about his students, about what he liked teaching most. He told her how they learned to make bread from scratch, how he tried to teach them where food came from, how every recipe had a story. Something about the way he spoke, the calm, grounded rhythm, made her forget the noise of her own world for a moment. She wasn't a CEO or a headline. She was just a woman sharing cake with a stranger and his child, while the city drowned softly in rain. A waiter appeared, checking on water glasses, and the spell broke. Clara glanced at her phone. A new message blinked. Investor arrived early, waiting in the private room downstairs. She sighed. Duty was already calling her back. I should go, she said, standing. Thank you for the cake and the company. Noah nodded, smiling. You're welcome. Sometimes the wrong table turns out to be the right one. Elena grinned. You can come next year if you want. Daddy says birthdays are better when people show up. Clara felt something inside her shift. It wasn't sadness exactly, more like recognition. I'll remember that, she said softly. She turned toward the elevator, feeling the city's pulse hum through the glass walls around her. When she looked back, Noah was laughing at something his daughter said, cutting another slice of cake, the candle flickering between them like a tiny, stubborn flame. The elevator doors closed, and in the mirrored walls she saw herself. Flawless makeup, perfect posture, eyes that didn't quite look alive. She wondered when she had become someone so defined by motion that stillness felt foreign. When the doors opened, she didn't check her phone or her schedule. She stepped out into the lobby, letting the sound of rain wrap around her. The air smelled of salt and metal and something faintly sweet. Chocolate, maybe, carried from the kitchen upstairs. Outside, the storm had softened. The harbor stretched before her, calm and endless. She paused beneath the awning, watching reflections tremble across the water. Somewhere above her, laughter drifted faintly through the glass. She smiled, almost to herself. Maybe the universe just wanted me to sit down for once. And for the first time in years, Clara Whitmore didn't rush anywhere. She just stood there, breathing, the rain easing against her coat, the lights of Halifax shimmering like a promise waiting to be kept. The flight back to Toronto felt longer than usual. Clara sat by the window, watching clouds turn from silver to ash against the fading sky. The city below dissolved into darkness, but her mind wouldn't quiet. Every few minutes, the memory returned. Noah's calm voice, Elena's shy smile, the crooked candle trembling in the rain light. She had spent years mastering the art of forgetting people the moment they left a meeting, yet somehow, this stranger and his daughter refused to fade. When the plane touched down, she slipped into the familiar rhythm. Emails, calls, the muted chaos of Pearson Airport. Her driver was waiting. Black sedan, silent greeting. The city unfolded through the tinted windows, glass towers, wet streets, neon spilling across puddles. Toronto always looked polished from a distance, as if pretending it hadn't learned how to feel. By the time she reached her penthouse, it was almost midnight. The skyline stretched endlessly beyond the windows, a field of static stars. She set her phone on the marble counter and poured herself a glass of wine, though she didn't drink it. The email icon blinked. She ignored it for exactly 30 seconds before habit 1. Subject: Community Voices. Press Briefing Monday. She opened it, skimming through corporate enthusiasm, written by someone who'd never stepped outside Bay Street. A new philanthropic initiative celebrating unheard communities, led by Northlight Media in partnership with regional schools. The language was clean, hollow, crafted to sound like kindness without the work. Clara's jaw tightened. It was a PR campaign dressed as charity, a way to soften the company's image after a quarter of layoffs. She scrolled to the bottom, where her assistant had added a note. We'll need you to record a short video message. Something warm, something hopeful. Clara closed her laptop, the screen going dark with her reflection still faintly visible. Warm, hopeful. The same words she'd used to sell stories she didn't believe in. She moved to the window, looking down at the city. Somewhere, in some apartment below, people were cooking dinner, arguing, laughing, living. Her world, though vast, felt airless. The silence pressed on her chest like altitude, For the first time in years, she felt something she couldn't file or schedule. Exhaustion that wasn't physical, but moral, the kind that starts quietly and spreads. She had built a career on precision, crisis management, calculated empathy, polished sincerity. But now, all of it seemed like scaffolding around something hollow. Her phone vibrated again, this time with a call. She didn't look at the screen before answering. Clara Whitmore. Clara, it's Mitchell, the voice of her deputy CEO, smooth as lacquer. We're moving ahead with community voices. The Prime Minister's office might acknowledge it if we handle it right. I'm thinking we feature a local teacher or single parent. Someone authentic but safe. Safe, she repeated. You know what I mean. Relatable, not radical. We can shoot in Halifax if you want regional color. The mention of Halifax made her chest tighten. That's convenient, she said flatly. I'll have comms draft something. You just have to deliver it. When the call ended, Clara sat in the dark for a long time. The skyline flickered in the glass like a heartbeat she couldn't slow. Halifax. She thought of the candlelight on Noah's face, of Elena pushing the plate toward her. You can have some if you want. The sincerity of that gesture, unguarded, undesigned, had more truth than anything she'd approved in years. She pulled open her desk drawer, searching for something she couldn't name, and found an old notebook, leather-bound, untouched for years. Inside were fragments from another life, before Northlight, before boardrooms, scribbles about storytelling, about people, about meaning. She traced one line written in her own handwriting. A voice without truth is just noise. The city hummed outside her window, a machine of deadlines and transactions. Clara closed the notebook and pressed it against her chest. For the first time, the noise felt unbearable. When morning came, Toronto gleamed under a thin layer of fog. Clara moved through her routine. Coffee, news briefings, the same gray blazer. Yet everything felt slightly misaligned, like a melody played in the wrong key. At Northlight headquarters, the lobby screens already displayed mock-ups for the new campaign. Smiling children, staged classrooms, glossy headlines about compassion. Her assistant greeted her with a bright, rehearsed tone. The PR team wants your signature on the statement by noon. The tagline is, every story deserves a stage. Clara almost laughed. Every story. She thought of Noah teaching kids to bake bread, of Elena drawing on napkins, of that small, unfiltered moment that didn't need a stage at all. She signed nothing. Instead, she walked past the glass conference rooms, past the interns rehearsing their smiles, into her office overlooking the lake. The water was gray, endless, indifferent. For years, it had comforted her. Now it looked like distance. She stood there for a while, her hand on the window, until her reflection blurred into the cityscape. For the first time, she didn't feel powerful or prepared or even proud. She felt tired of herself, tired of the person who knew how to fix everything except her own emptiness. And yet, beneath that fatigue, a single thought began to form. Quiet, persistent, disobedient. Maybe it wasn't too late to start listening. 2 weeks later, the city of Halifax appeared again on Clara's itinerary. Not as a coincidence this time, but under the line item, Site Visit, Community Voices Pilot. It was supposed to be a routine trip. Shake hands, review documents, smile for the camera. That was what these visits were for. Optics. Proof that Northlight cared. The morning she arrived, the harbor was blanketed in mist, the air sharp with salt and early autumn wind. She rode in the back of a black sedan through narrow streets lined with brick storefronts and murals that looked too alive to be called art. The driver asked if she wanted to stop for coffee. She didn't. The school sat at the edge of an industrial district, Eastwood Community Skills Center. The sign read, letters chipped but proud. Clara hadn't meant to stop there. The actual meeting was scheduled at a newly renovated arts hub across town, but something made her tell the driver to pull over. Maybe it was the faint smell of baked bread drifting through the morning air. Maybe it was curiosity, something she rarely allowed herself anymore. Inside, the building was warm, the walls painted in cheerful colors that had begun to fade. A receptionist looked up from her desk. "Can I help you?" "I'm from Northlight Media," Clara said, realizing how corporate it sounded. "I'm visiting the area for our community initiative. I heard this school has a culinary program." The woman smiled knowingly. "That'd be Chef Grant's class, down the hall to your left. You'll hear the noise before you see it." Noise was right. Laughter and clatter spilled from the open door halfway down the corridor. Clara paused in the doorway and watched. Noah stood at the center of the room, sleeves rolled up, an apron dusted with flour. Around him, a dozen students kneaded dough on metal tables, arguing playfully about technique. He moved among them with the ease of someone who belonged exactly where he was. His voice was steady, calm, instructive. "Don't rush the yeast," he said. "Good bread takes its time. Everything worth tasting does. You can't fake patience, you can only practice it." One student groaned. "But chef, we're hungry now," laughter broke out. Noah grinned. "Then you'll appreciate it more when it's done. Respect the process, respect where your food comes from. That's how you respect yourself." Clara felt something stir in her chest, a strange mix of admiration and envy. He spoke about food the way she used to speak about storytelling, back before every sentence had to pass through legal review. When the bell rang, the students packed up, leaving behind a room that smelled like warmth itself. Noah turned toward the door and froze when he saw her. For a moment, neither spoke. "Didn't expect to see you again," he said finally, wiping his hands on a towel. "I didn't expect to be here," Clara admitted. "The car just stopped." He raised an eyebrow. "Cars don't just stop?" "Mine does," she said, half smiling. "Especially when something smells like fresh bread." He laughed quietly, shaking his head. "Still CEO humor, huh?" "I'm trying to get better," she said. "Can we talk?" He gestured to a small table in the corner stacked with cookbooks. "Long as you don't mind the flour." She sat, smoothing her coat, feeling out of place among the aprons and mixing bowls. "Your class," she began. "It's remarkable. The way you talk to them, it's not just about food." "It's never just about food," Noah said. "It's about patience, pride, knowing that the work of your hands means something." Clara nodded. "That's exactly why I'm here. Northlight's launching an educational initiative, online culinary content for public schools. I want it to be real, not just glossy. Would you consider joining as a consultant?" Noah leaned back, crossing his arms. "Consultant, huh? Sounds like a nice word for decoration." "It's more than that," she said carefully. "We want authenticity." He studied her, silent for a moment. "No offense, but your company's good at turning authenticity into branding. I've seen the ads. Diverse faces, soft lighting, perfect slogans. You don't want real stories. You want safe ones." Clara didn't argue. She'd used those same tactics herself. "Maybe you're right," she said finally. "But maybe I'm trying to change that." He frowned slightly. "Why?" "Because I'm tired," she said, almost to herself. "Tired of pretending. Tired of noise that sounds like care." Something in her voice, unrehearsed, almost raw, seemed to catch him off guard. He looked down at the towel in his hands, then back at her. "You're serious." "I am." Noah sighed, leaning forward on his elbows. "Here's the thing, Clara. You can't film what happens in this room and expect it to translate to screens. It's not pretty. It's messy. The kids burn things, they argue, they quit and come back. That's real learning. You sure your board wants to see that?" "I'm not sure what they want anymore," she said softly. "But I know what I need to see." For a long time, the only sound was the faint hum of the ovens cooling behind them. Finally, Noah nodded toward the counter, where the loaves rested under clean cloths. "You eat bread, fresh out of the oven?" "I don't usually eat carbs," she said. "Then today's special," he replied, cutting a slice and handing it to her. The crust was crisp, the inside soft and fragrant. She took a bite, surprised by how it grounded her. "It's good," she murmured. "It's honest," he said. "Big difference." She set the slice down carefully. "If I wanted you to help Make this project honest. What would it take for you to say yes? He thought for a moment. You'd have to let me tell the truth, even when it's ugly. No filters, no scripts, no pretending the world's fairer than it is. Clara met his gaze. Maybe that's exactly what I need. A voice that doesn't protect me. Noah smiled faintly. The kind of a smile that carried both caution and curiosity. You don't know what you're asking for. I think I do, she said. I'm asking for someone who won't lie to me. The pause between them felt alive. A quiet negotiation, without papers or signatures. Outside the fog had begun to lift, light spreading across the windows in slow golden bands. Noah folded the towel and hung it neatly on a hook. All right, he said finally. I'll try it once. No promises beyond that. Clara stood, her pulse quickening in a way she hadn't felt since her early career. That's enough. As she turned to leave, he called after her. Clara, she looked back. Next time you stop by, he said, don't make the car do it for you. She laughed softly, nodding. Deal. When she stepped outside, the air was cool and bright. The mist had thinned, and the scent of fresh bread lingered like a quiet reminder that some beginnings don't announce themselves. They arrive disguised as small detours, waiting for us to pay attention. The following Monday, the Northlight Communications team scheduled their first virtual briefing with Noah. The meeting invite read, Introductory Discussion, Culinary Education Project. Noah didn't bother changing out of his flour-dusted apron. He finished wiping down the stainless steel counters of his classroom, set his laptop on a stool, and clicked, Join Meeting. The camera blinked on, revealing a mosaic of polished faces framed by tidy office backgrounds. White walls, art prints, perfectly lit smiles. Good morning, Mr. Grant. A woman from public relations greeted him brightly. We're so excited to have you on board. Clara's told us wonderful things about your work. Noah adjusted his laptop. Morning. Just call me Noah. On the screen, the team looked like a panel from a lifestyle magazine. There was the brand strategist with sharp glasses, the marketing head with a gleaming headset, and the social media manager whose background featured staged plants and pastel mugs. Then Clara appeared, her camera perfectly centered, her posture composed, but her eyes softer than the rest. Thanks for making time, she said. We just want to get a sense of how your class might fit into the bigger initiative. Noah nodded once, glancing at the flour still dusting his apron. Sure, but I'll warn you, this isn't a clean kitchen show. The strategist laughed politely. That's actually great. Authenticity plays really well with audiences right now. Noah tilted his head. Authenticity plays well? The laughter thinned. Clara shifted slightly, but said nothing. I just mean, the strategist continued, people love seeing real stories. Real people. It builds trust. Trust in who? Noah asked. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the screen. The company or the people being filmed? The strategist blinked. Well, ideally both. Right, Noah said, leaning back, because I've seen this kind of project before. Someone edits the story until it fits a slogan. The people you film become props for a brand that forgets them the next quarter. So before we start talking about cameras and scripts, who's really supposed to benefit from this program? Silence filled the virtual space. Someone muted themselves, just to avoid the sound of breathing. Clara watched him carefully. She knew that tone. Measured, firm, not angry, but deeply protective. She'd sat through hundreds of meetings where men twice his age tried to sound authentic and never came close. But here, this man in an apron, surrounded by the clatter of a real kitchen, had somehow said what she'd been too afraid to admit. The social media manager cleared her throat. Our goal is to showcase community success stories. We want to inspire people to do what? Noah interrupted gently. Watch a feel-good clip, share it online before moving on. Inspiration doesn't change systems. Opportunities do. The words landed like quiet thunder. Clara leaned forward, elbows on her desk. Then what would you want to see instead? She asked. He looked directly at her through the pixelated connection. I'd want the kids to tell their own stories. Give them the cameras. Let them show what matters to them, not what we think should matter. Clara's lips parted slightly. the thought catching her off guard. Around them, the other screens flickered with uneasy smiles, people pretending to type notes while waiting for someone to steer the conversation back to safer ground. "That's an interesting idea," said the strategist, already sounding like they were filing it away for later. "We can definitely explore student involvement in the creative process." Noah nodded, reading between the lines. "Sure, explore it. Just remember, you can't capture truth from behind a filter." He didn't say it harshly. It came out like advice, patient and steady, the way he spoke to his students. The meeting stumbled forward for another 15 minutes. Talk of budgets, timelines, visual tone. But the rhythm had changed. Even the executives who tried to reclaim control found themselves measuring their words. Clara noticed it too. Something about Noah's presence shifted the entire dynamic. He didn't push. He simply refused to perform. As the meeting wrapped up, Clara spoke last. "Thank you, everyone. Let's take Noah's feedback seriously. We'll regroup next week." Screens began to blink off one by one until only two remained, hers and his. "You didn't have to hold back like that," she said softly. "I wasn't holding back," he replied. "I just said what I'd tell my students. If you want people to trust you, stop selling and start listening." Clara smiled faintly. "You realize half the people in that call probably had a small heart attack," he chuckled. "Then maybe their hearts needed it." The sound of his laughter, low, easy, seemed to dissolve the stiffness left in the room. She looked at him through the screen, noticing the flower still clinging to his sleeve, the simple steadiness in his eyes. For the first time, Clara thought, someone wasn't performing. Noah glanced sideways, as if sensing her silence. "So, Oysen," he said, "do I still have the job?" "You do," she said, "but only if you promise not to stop asking hard questions." He smiled. "Deal." And as the call ended, Clara sat back in her chair, realizing that something had shifted, not just in the project, but in the space she'd built around herself for years. For once, it didn't feel like control slipping away. It felt like something real finally breaking through. It started on a Thursday morning, quiet and unassuming, like most storms before they hit. Clara was in the middle of a meeting when her assistant slipped in, pale and hesitant, holding a tablet. "You should see this," she whispered. The screen showed a video already racking up thousands of views. It was shot during last week's community visit to Eastwood, Clara standing beside Noah and a group of students, laughing as a boy proudly held up a tray of muffins. It should have been harmless, even heartwarming, but the edit told a different story. Dramatic music swelled under slow-motion clips. A voiceover, dripping with cynicism, narrated, "Northlight Media's CEO, Clara Whitmore, takes her brand of redemption to the South Side. But who's really being helped here, and who's being used?" The captions were worse. "Corporate charity or image laundering?" Followed by, "White CEO uses black teacher to clean up her company's past." By noon, it had spread across every platform. Comment sections filled with outrage, sarcasm, and speculation. Clara scrolled for too long, watching the narrative twist into something grotesque. Classic PR stunt. They always find a black face to make themselves look better. Another fake ally pretending to care. She dropped the tablet on her desk and stared out the window. Outside, Toronto gleamed under cold sunlight, unaware that one edit had just turned goodwill into scandal. Across the country, in Halifax, Noah was finishing class when a student approached him, phone in hand, half smirking. "Chef, you're famous," he said, tilting the screen. The same video played. At first Noah laughed, thinking it was some harmless school clip. Then he saw the title. He read the comments. He saw his own face freeze frame beneath words that made his stomach twist. The perfect token. The laughter around him faltered as the students realized it wasn't a joke. One muttered, "That's messed up, man." Another whispered, "Guess even teachers can sell out." Noah swallowed the heat, rising in his throat. "Back to work," he said quietly, voice steady but eyes hard. The class obeyed, but the air had changed. Later that afternoon, he picked up his daughter from school. Elena climbed into the car, unusually quiet. She held her tablet close to her chest. "Daddy," she said softly, "why are people saying bad things about you online?" Noah gripped the steering wheel. "Where did you see that?" "My friend showed me. She said you were on the news. She said—" Elena hesitated, eyes filling. "She said you helped someone fake being nice." The silence that followed felt heavier than any insult. He wanted to explain, to tell her the world wasn't that cruel. But he couldn't lie. "Sometimes," he said finally, "people don't wait to hear the whole story before they decide what's true." That night, he didn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table long after Elena went to bed, scrolling through headlines, blog posts, and opinion threads. The words blurred into each other until they didn't mean anything. He thought of the students who looked at him differently now, the reporters who'd never set foot in his classroom, yet spoke as if they knew him. When the phone rang, he almost didn't answer. Then he saw the name. Clara, her voice came fast, controlled, but shaking underneath. "You've seen it." "I have. I didn't leak it. You know that, right?" "I believe you." "Good," she breathed out. "Because we can't let them take this from us." He frowned. "Take what?" "The truth. The story. They think they can twist it into something cheap. But this isn't theirs to spin. Not this time." Noah leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "You sound like you're planning a fight." "I am," she said simply. "I won't retreat. Not after what we started." There was a long pause. He could hear city noise through her end of the line, the faint hum of traffic, a siren in the distance. "Clara," he said slowly, "you know how these things work. They'll move on to the next outrage by next week. Maybe letting it fade is better." "No," she said, the word sharp. "Silence lets them win. You told me once, you can't change the recipe if you don't get in the kitchen. Well, the kitchen's on fire now, and I'm not leaving." Noah smiled despite himself. "You remember that line?" "I've been quoting it all day," he exhaled, half in resignation, half in admiration. "You know this might get worse before it gets better." "I do," she said, "but I'd rather be hated for trying than invisible for staying quiet." Noah rubbed a hand over his face. The image of Elena's tearful eyes flashed in his mind, but so did the memory of those students in his class, kids who rarely saw adults fight for something without giving up halfway. "All right," he said finally, "then we do it together. What do you suggest?" "First," he said, "we stop reacting and start showing. We film the truth. No lights, no scripts, no perfect angles. Just the kids, the kitchen, what we're actually building. People think they know the story? Fine. Let's show them the one they missed." Clara was silent for a moment. "You're serious." "I am," he said. "If they want to talk about authenticity, let's give them some they can't handle." There was a pause, then the sound of her quiet laughter. Half relief, half exhaustion. "You realize this is insane?" "Probably," he said, "but the good kind." "Then let's do it," she said. Her voice steadied. "We'll make them watch the real thing." When the call ended, Noah leaned back, the weight on his chest easing just enough for him to breathe again. He glanced toward Elena's room. The faint glow of her nightlight spilled through the crack in the door. He whispered to himself, not sure if it was a promise or a warning. They don't get to define us. Across the country, Clara stood in her office overlooking the lake, the city glittering beneath a deep, indigo sky. She replayed Noah's words in her mind, show them the one they missed. The scandal still burned online. Commentators dissected every frame, but somewhere beneath the noise, something stronger began to stir. For the first time in years, Clara didn't feel cornered. She felt clear. She opened a new message, typed 3 words to Noah, and hit send. "We take it back." By the following week, the noise had reached a fever pitch. Pundits, think pieces, hashtags both for and against them. Clara had barely slept. The online storm had burned through every major outlet, but she refused to let it die on someone else's terms. And when Noah called early Tuesday morning, his voice, calm but firm, she knew exactly what he was about to say. "It's time we tell it ourselves," he said. Clara glanced at the growing stack of PR drafts on her desk. Carefully worded apologies. Defensive talking points. All lies wrapped in polite grammar. Then we don't write it, she said. We show it. They agreed on something radical. No corporate spin. No professional crew. Just a live stream from Eastwood's culinary classroom, where it all began. Raw, unfiltered, real. The plan came together faster than either expected. Within 48 hours, they had a small team of volunteers, 2 borrowed cameras, and a network connection that barely worked on good days. Northlight's communications department had no idea. Clara didn't ask permission. She simply sent a message to her assistant. Cancel everything after 2 p.m. I'll be busy cooking. That Friday, the live broadcast began. The screen flickered open to the sound of sizzling pans and laughter echoing through Eastwood's kitchen. Noah stood at the center, sleeves rolled, apron dusted with flour. Behind him, his students moved with nervous excitement, chopping vegetables, kneading dough, stirring pots like it was a normal day that suddenly mattered. Clara appeared at the edge of the frame, not in a suit, but in a simple gray cardigan. No script, no teleprompter, just a microphone clipped to her collar, and the kind of quiet resolve that comes when you stop pretending. Welcome to Eastwood, she began. There's been a lot said about this project. Some of it true, some of it not. So today we're inviting you in. No edits, no slogans, just people doing what they love. She turned toward Noah, who gave a small nod. Cooking, Kizitsais, he said, isn't just about food. It's about process, about patience. You can't change a recipe if you don't step into the kitchen. He looked straight into the camera. And you can't change a system if you won't sit at the table. For a moment, no one spoke. The room held its breath, even through the screen. Then one of the students, a shy girl named Rosa, piped up. Chef, what are we making today? Something simple, Noah said, smiling. Bread, the oldest story there is. The next hour unfolded with an ease that no PR team could have planned. Noah taught, joked, and let the kids lead. Claire asked questions, sometimes clumsy, always genuine. Viewers flooded the live chat. Teachers, parents, strangers who stumbled on the stream and stayed. When a student burned a pan, the laughter was real. When one dropped flour all over Noah's shoes, the camera caught it and kept rolling. Nothing polished, everything true. By the 40-minute mark, the viewer count had passed 50,000. By the end of the hour, it was trending across platforms. Someone in the chat typed, "The table is open." Another replied, "Finally, something honest." The phrase spread like a spark, catching dry grass. By evening, the hashtag had turned into a movement. People started posting their own open table moments, community meals, classroom projects, even families sitting down together after months of silence. The next morning, the media caught up. Headlines flooded in, from scandal to substance. The table is open goes viral. What happens when leadership stops performing? A black teacher, a CEO, and the kitchen that changed the conversation. Northlight's headquarters, however, was less enthusiastic. The communications team went into panic mode. By noon, Mitchell, the company's executive vice president, was pacing outside Clara's office. He entered without knocking. What the hell was that? Clara looked up from her desk, unbothered. Breakfast, she said. Don't play cute. You went live on a corporate controversy without approval. Legal's in chaos, investors are calling. And public sentiment is up 40%, she interrupted. For the first time in years, people are talking about Northlight without disgust. You're welcome. Mitchell slammed a folder onto her desk. You think a viral video fixes years of corporate rot? This isn't reform, it's theater. Clara stood, her calm sharper than anger. Maybe, but it's real theater. And for once, it's not performed by people like you, he froze, eyes narrowing. You're getting reckless, Clara. No, she said. I'm getting free. The tension between them was a silent battlefield, the old guard against something new, unpredictable, alive. Mitchell left with a threat disguised as a smile. You're playing with fire, and fires burn everything. I know, she said. That's how kitchens work. Back at Eastwood,
Noah had no idea what was happening in Toronto's boardrooms. He was too busy trying to respond to the flood of messages. Former students wrote from across the country. A food bank asked if they could host their own open table night. Even a group of firefighters sent a video of themselves baking bread together, captioned, "You can't change the world hungry." When Clara called that evening, her tone was both exhausted and exhilarated. "We did it," she said. "They can't twist it anymore. The story belongs to us now." Noah smiled. "Then let's feed it right." Over the next few days, the table as open became more than a trend. It became a rallying cry. Churches, schools, community centers adopted it as a theme for their own events. Journalists who had once mocked the initiative now called it the most authentic act of corporate redemption in decades. But with success came fractures. Inside Northlight, the boardroom air thickened with unease. Clara's influence was growing, not through power plays, but through credibility, the very thing the company had lost. Mitchell watched from his glass office, jaw tight, scrolling through the endless stream of comments, praising her leadership. She's rewriting the playbook. Finally, a CEO who listens. He could feel control slipping. And worse, people were starting to look at him differently, as the man who nearly killed the company's soul before she revived it. One evening, as the city lights flickered over Bay Street, Mitchell made a call. "She's overreaching," he said to someone unseen. "It's time we remind her who built this empire." Meanwhile, in Halifax, Noah finished another long day of classes. The last batch of bread sat cooling on the
counter. He watched his students laughing, elbowing each other, still buzzing from the attention. One of them asked, "Chef, did you see? We're on the news again." Noah smiled. "Yeah, I did." "What now?" another asked. He looked around at the faces, hopeful, scared, alive. "Now," he said softly, "now we keep the table open." That night, he sat by the window with Elena asleep upstairs. His phone buzzed with notifications, donations, invitations, noise. But what stayed with him wasn't the fame. It was the image of that kitchen, full of laughter and truth, streaming live to a world that had almost forgotten how to listen. Across the country, Clara closed her laptop and stared at the glow of the city beyond her window. For the first time in years, she didn't see a skyline built on competition. She saw a map, a web of connections stretching from one open table to another, and somewhere between them, a movement had begun to breathe on its own. The glow of "the table is open" hadn't even begun to fade before the shadow started moving. For weeks, Clara's inbox overflowed with invitations, praise, and new partnerships. The public saw a revolution. Inside Northlight, it looked more like rebellion. Mitchell had been silent since that night, but silence was never his retreat. It was his reload. It began subtly. A donor backed out of a scheduled contribution to the initiative without explanation. Then another. The company's internal servers glitched one morning, crashing the analytics for open table donations. When IT traced the disruption, they found fragments of encrypted code rerouted through an old Northlight domain, one Mitchell still had access to. Clara noticed the pattern before anyone said it aloud. Budgets were suddenly under review. PR staff who had supported her publicly were quietly reassigned. And then came the leak. An email surfaced online, a snippet of an internal thread between Clara and Noah, stripped of context and weaponized. It made it sound like the entire open table movement was a calculated branding strategy, a controlled empathy model for narrative rehabilitation. It was an obvious fake, but convincing enough for those who wanted to believe. Within hours, the smear campaign reignited. "Performative philanthropy," one headline read. Another was colder. "The table closes. How good intentions mask corporate power plays." Noah was in the middle of grading assignments when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. One message. "Stay in your lane." He stared at it for a long moment, thumb hovering over the screen. It wasn't a threat that screamed. It whispered, the kind that carried weight precisely because it was calm. He deleted it, but his pulse wouldn't slow. That evening, after class, he walked Elena home under a sky bruised with low clouds. She skipped beside him, humming, clutching her backpack. He forced a smile, tried to leave the heaviness behind them, but even his laughter felt rehearsed. When they reached home, Elena ran to her room and froze in the doorway. On her desk, propped against her pencil holder, was a note, crudely folded notebook paper. In thick, black marker, it read, "Your dad sold out." Noah felt the air leave the room. His daughter stood motionless, the paper trembling in her small hands. "Who left this sign?" he asked, though he already knew she wouldn't have an answer. "I found it in my locker," she whispered. "Someone must have put it there during lunch." He took the note gently, his fingers tightening around the edges. There was so much he wanted to say. That people were cruel when they were afraid, that truth took time, but the words got tangled somewhere between anger and heartbreak. That night, he sat on the porch, long after Elena had gone to bed, the note beside him like a stain that wouldn't fade. He thought about walking away, just once, protect his daughter, stay quiet, let the storm pass. But then he remembered the kitchen full of laughter, the students who'd started to believe that truth could stand on its own, and Clara's voice echoing through that live stream. No edits, no slogans, just people doing what they love. He picked up his phone and called her. She answered immediately, voice tight. "I heard," she said before he could speak. "They're pulling sponsors, freezing budgets, and someone's leaking selective data from inside Northlight." "I got a message, that's it," he said quietly. "Anonymous number. Stay in your lane." "And Elena," he hesitated. "She found a note at school." Silence filled the line, sharp and deliberate. Then Clara said, "What did it say?" He read the words aloud. Clara didn't respond at first. When she finally did, her voice was different, lower, colder, controlled like steel. "They're going after a child now, Clara." "No," she cut in. "This isn't PR anymore. It's war." The next morning, Northlight's boardroom felt colder than usual. Clara entered with the folder in her hand, her expression unreadable. Mitchell was already seated, smiling faintly like someone who'd been expecting her. "Quite the storm we're in," he said. Clara laid the folder on the table. "Save the small talk. I know what you're doing." "Doing?" He laughed softly. "You think I'm behind anonymous messages and bad headlines? Don't flatter yourself," she leaned forward. "You're pulling strings to make this fall apart from the inside. You want people to doubt me, to scare him. But you made one mistake." "Oh?" "You touched his daughter." Mitchell's smile faded, just slightly. "You're implying a lot without proof." "I don't need proof," she said. "Not for what comes next." Her tone was even, but the air around her seemed to shift. The other executives glanced at one another, unsure if they were witnessing a warning or a declaration. That afternoon, she drove to Halifax without telling anyone. The weather was brutal, rain slicing across the highway, wind howling off the coast. When she arrived at Eastwood, Noah was still in the kitchen, pretending to focus on a batch of dough he wasn't going to bake. She walked in quietly and placed the note on the counter. "This is what they do," she said. "When they can't win the argument, they go after your humanity." Noah looked at her, exhausted. "What are we supposed to do? Every time we build something good, they find a way to poison it." "Then we stop letting them control the narrative," Clara said. "We go public again. But this time it's not just us. It's the parents, the kids, the teachers, everyone who's seen what this really is." "You want to make it bigger?" he asked, almost incredulous. "I want to make it unstoppable." Noah exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "You realize they'll come harder." "Let them," she said. "We're not hiding anymore." For a moment, the only sound was the rain against the window and the hum of the oven still preheating. Clara picked up the note again, folded it once, and slipped it into her coat pocket. "They wanted to scare us," she said softly. "Instead, they've just given us the headline." "What headline?" Noah asked. She met his eyes. "They came for a child. We answered with a community." That night, Clara drafted a single message and sent it to her entire communications team before Mitchell could stop her. Statement: "The Open Table stands for inclusion,
dignity, and truth. When fear tries to silence compassion, we don't step back. We set another chair. The table is open. Within hours, it spread across every feed. The story began to turn again. Parents posted photos of their kids with homemade signs. We belong at the table. Teachers uploaded clips from their classrooms, tagging Noah and Clara. Even strangers began writing messages of solidarity, reminding them that truth might bend under pressure, but it never breaks quietly. The threats kept coming, but now so did the light. The meeting was set for 9:00 a.m., but by 8:30, the boardroom was already full. 12 members of Northlight's executive council sat behind polished oak, faces composed, eyes sharp. The city skyline stretched beyond the glass walls, distant, cold, indifferent. Clara stood near the end of the table, hands folded loosely in front of her. She'd faced tougher rooms, but never one that felt quite like this. Part courtroom, part battlefield. Mitchell entered last, as always, late enough to command attention, confident enough not to apologize. He dropped a folder on the table and leaned back in his chair. "Let's get this over with," he said smoothly. Ruth Delaney, the chairwoman, cleared her throat. "The agenda is to review Ms. Whitmore's conduct in relation to the Open Table project and assess its impact on company direction." Mitchell smiled thinly. "Impact, indeed."
He stood, pressing his palms against the table. Northlight was built on innovation, on market agility, on profit. Yet in the past 6 months, our CEO has transformed it into a charity circus. Live streams, activist slogans, viral stunts. Investors are nervous. Sponsors are leaving. And our name, our legacy, is being dragged through the mud of moral theater. Clara didn't flinch. She had expected every word. Mitchell turned toward the others. This company doesn't exist to host dinner tables or save schools. It exists to create value for shareholders. And right now, value is bleeding. He paused, waiting for murmurs of agreement. A few heads nodded, cautious but complicit. Then Ruth looked at Clara. "You may respond." Clara stepped forward. Her calm was almost unnerving. "I agree with Mr. Mitchell on one point," she said quietly. "Northlight was built on value. But somewhere along the way, we forgot what that word meant." She reached into her bag, pulled out a small remote and pressed play. The lights dimmed slightly as the wall screen flickered to life. No logos, no polished narration, just a shaky handheld clip, the raw footage from Eastwood's live stream. Noah teaching kids to knead dough. Elena asking from behind the camera, "Daddy, why do people call it open?" And Noah's voice, steady, patient. "Because when a table's open, no one has to ask if they're welcome." The next shot, a long table filled with families, students, and neighbors eating together under soft light. Laughter, conversation, simple joy. Then Clara's voice in the background. "You can't change a system from the outside. You have to sit down, even when you weren't invited." When the clip ended, the room was silent. No applause, no rebuttal. Just the quiet hum of air conditioning and the weight of something too human to quantify on a balance sheet. Clara turned back to the board. "This isn't theater. It's what leadership looks like when it remembers who it serves. We can chase numbers until the end of time, but if no one trusts what those numbers stand for, we've already failed." Mitchell scoffed, but the sound fell flat. Ruth's gaze shifted across the table, reading each face. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but firm. "I've been in this business longer than most of you have been alive," she said. "I've watched companies rise and collapse, not from bad markets, but from cowardice. The refusal to evolve." She placed her hand on the table. "My vote. Retain Miss Whitmore as CEO." One by one, the others followed, a few hesitant, a few defiant, but enough. When it reached Mitchell, he gave a small, bitter smile. "No confidence," he said simply. "Duly noted," Ruth replied. "The motion passes. Ms. Whitmore remains." The meeting adjourned. The room emptied slowly, murmurs trailing behind like fog. Clara stood by the window for a moment, letting the view settle. Her phone buzzed. She looked down, typed a short message, and hit send. To Noah Grant. Message, we're still standing. 2 weeks later, the headlines had changed. Northlight had formally announced the creation of the Open Table Foundation, an independent nonprofit co-founded by Clara Whitmore and Noah Grant, dedicated to community-based education and food access initiatives across Canada. The announcement video showed no branding, no grand speeches. Just Noah and Clara sitting side by side at the same worn table from Eastwood, smiling quietly as a new sign was hung behind them. The Open Table Foundation, a seat for everyone. The public embraced it instantly. Donations poured in. Schools volunteered to partner. Retired chefs offered mentorship. It felt like momentum, unstoppable, unfiltered, real. But not everyone cheered. By the second month, the first wave of attacks arrived, not from within Northlight this time, but from the outside. An editorial in a conservative paper called the Foundation a breeding ground for soft socialism. A commentator sneered on live TV. This isn't education, it's indoctrination with good lighting. Online, the insults multiplied. Corporate guilt disguised as virtue. Another woke experiment on taxpayers' dime. Clara's legal department warned her of pending compliance reviews initiated by anonymous government channels. Meanwhile, Noah noticed a black SUV parked across from his apartment for 3 nights in a row. He told himself it was coincidence. He didn't believe it. By the 3rd week, exhaustion began to creep in. Clara's team was stretched thin, fielding hate mail and threats disguised as inquiries. Noah found himself walking Elena to school, with his shoulders tighter, scanning faces without meaning to. One night, Clara arrived in Halifax unannounced. She walked into the school kitchen where Noah was cleaning up, and for a moment, neither spoke. The air smelled of yeast and rain. "They're tightening the noose," she said. He nodded. "They're scared." "They're trying to make us look like radicals," she continued. "That we're teaching politics instead of compassion." "And?" Noah asked. Clara met his eyes. "And it's working. Some sponsors are pulling out. Even Ruth called. Says the board is nervous again." Noah leaned against the counter. "Let them be nervous. They should be." She gave a small, tired laugh. "You sound like me now." "I've been hanging around a bad influence," he said. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Clara pulled out her phone, opened the latest hate article, and slid it toward him. "They say we're corrupting young minds." He looked at the screen, then back at her. "Maybe we are," he said. "We're teaching them not to look away." She smiled faintly. "You really think truth can win against money?" "I don't think," he said. "I know." She looked down at the counter, the same counter where months ago he'd taught his students to bake bread, to respect where food came from, the same table where the movement had begun. "Then we keep doing what we started," she said. "Even if they hit harder?" "Especially then." Noah exhaled slowly, then nodded. "All right, we build it bigger, but not with noise, with proof." Clara nodded back. "If they're going to hit us for telling the truth, then we win by living it." The kitchen lights flickered softly. Outside, the rain eased to a hush. They stood there, a black teacher and a white CEO, side by side, in a small Halifax kitchen that had somehow become the front line of something larger than both of them. And in the quiet between thunder and resolve, one truth settled deep. They hadn't just started a movement. They had started a reckoning. The first snow of the season had barely melted when Toronto prepared for the event no one could quite define. It wasn't a gala, nor a conference, nor another polished PR showcase. On the posters scattered across the city, the words were simple. What we built, a day at the table. No sponsors' logos, no celebrity guests, just the emblem of the Open Table Foundation, a small circle of hands around a loaf of bread. By noon, the community hall in downtown Toronto was filled to capacity. Folding tables replaced stages. There were no spotlights, no grand podiums, only round tables arranged in imperfect circles where parents, teachers, students, and volunteers sat side by side. At the back, the aroma of fresh bread filled the air, courtesy of Noah's students from Eastwood, who had woken before dawn to bake. Clara moved quietly among the tables, greeting people by name when she could remember, by warmth when she couldn't. She wore no badge, no title, just a dark sweater and a lanyard that read, Volunteer. Reporters hovered near the entrance, unsure where to aim their cameras. There was no front, no center. The story refused to behave like one. When the hum of conversation began to settle, Noah stepped forward, not onto a stage, but into the middle of the room. His voice carried not because of microphones, but because people wanted to hear it. Most of you already know who I am, he said, and if you don't, that's fine too. I'm just the guy who got tired of watching good people talk themselves out of change. A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. He continued, when we started Open Table, it wasn't a movement, it was dinner, bread and tea and conversation, that's all. But sometimes, that's where revolutions start, not in boardrooms or parliaments, but in kitchens, where people remember they matter. A murmur of agreement spread around the room. Parents nodded. Teachers smiled. Noah glanced toward the back where Clara stood, hands clasped loosely. We've been called a lot of things, he said. Dreamers, radicals, idealists. But here's the thing, Ruud. When people are afraid of something real, they call it names until it feels safe again. We're not here to be safe. We're here to be honest. The room quieted further. Then it was Elena's turn. She was smaller than the podium that hadn't been provided, but Noah had dragged over a chair for her to stand on. Her notebook trembled slightly in her hands. She looked at the crowd, journalists, activists, teachers, business leaders, and for a moment, she looked like any other 10-year-old facing something too big. Then she took a breath. My dad says stories are like bread, she began, her voice clear but soft. They only mean something if you share them. A quiet smile flickered across Noah's face. She continued, but lately people talk about us like we're not real, like we're part of someone's campaign or someone's brand. So I just wanted to say, she looked straight at the cameras lining the walls. We are not your content, we are the story. It landed like thunder in a room that had forgotten how to breathe. Somewhere near the back, a cameraman lowered his lens. The journalists, who'd come ready to hunt for sound bites, found themselves caught in something different. Silence that refused to perform. Elena stepped down. Noah pulled her into a hug as the room erupted, not in cheers, not in noise, but in applause, so long and quiet it felt sacred. After her, parents spoke. A single mother from Halifax credited Open Table for keeping her son in school. A teacher from Winnipeg who used the foundation's grant to start a community kitchen where students cooked for elders. A retired journalist who admitted through tears that he once wrote stories designed to sell outrage instead of understanding. Every voice carried a piece of truth that didn't need amplification. By mid-afternoon, the light through the tall windows had softened. Snow flurries drifted outside, dissolving against the glass. Someone began lighting small candles across the tables, a tradition borrowed from Eastwood's very first dinner. Clara stepped forward only when everyone else had spoken. She didn't walk to the middle. She simply stood near the edge of the room, where the light touched the floor in long silver streaks. For months, she said quietly, people have asked me what leadership looks like now, and I think I finally understand. She paused, letting the weight of the day settle around her. Leadership isn't power. It's permission. Permission for others to rise, to speak, to belong. Her gaze swept across the room. The students, the parents, Noah and Elena sitting together, heads tilted toward each other. If I've learned anything from this journey, it's that the world doesn't change when you tell people what to do. It changes when you make space for them to do it. No one moved. The sound that followed wasn't applause, not yet. It was a kind of collective exhale, the sound people make when they've been holding something heavy for too long. Then, slowly, as if rehearsed by the heart instead of the mind, the audience began to stand, row by row, quietly, reverently, no cheers, no shouting, just a wave of people rising to their feet, a standing ovation made of silence. The only sound was the rustle of coats, the faint hum of heaters, and the soft, steady beat of hands meeting hands in rhythm with something larger than any one of them. Clara stood still, tears unshed but visible in the light. Noah caught her eye from across the room and nodded once. Outside, snow continued to fall over Toronto, soft, relentless, pure. And inside that hall, beneath the glow of 1,000 small candles, the world, or at least a small corner of it, remembered what hope felt like when it finally stopped apologizing for itself. It happened 3 days after the Toronto summit, the moment when it felt like everything had finally begun to heal. The headlines were still glowing with praise. The video of Elena's speech had surpassed 2 million views, and Clara had started to believe that maybe, for once, the tide wouldn't turn. Then it did. The first email came at dawn, an anonymous attachment, with the subject line, "Thought you'd want to see this." Inside was a file, an audio recording from 2 years earlier, back when Northlight's image was at its lowest, and Clara was still fighting to hold her position. The voice was unmistakably hers, clipped, efficient, and exhausted. "I don't care if it's performative," she said, "as long as it gets the job done." It was the kind of quote made for destruction, short enough to fit in a headline, sharp enough to cut through everything she had built. Within hours, the recording flooded social media. News outlets called it proof of hypocrisy. Commentators smirked through evening broadcasts, dissecting her fall from grace. Was the open table ever authentic, or just another PR mask? One host asked. Mitchell didn't even bother hiding. He appeared on a business podcast the next morning, his tone perfectly calibrated, faux sympathetic, quietly venomous. "It's a shame," he said. Clara was always talented, but somewhere along the way, she confused sincerity with strategy. The board at Northlight panicked. PR firms offered statements, crafted denials, begged her to stay quiet until the noise passed. But Clara had learned too much about silence to mistake it for safety. That evening, she sat alone in her apartment, the city lights stretching below like 1,000 fragile truths. The recording played once more from her laptop. She didn't flinch. She remembered that day vividly, the fatigue, the cynicism, the desperate need to protect her job. She hadn't been lying then, she had meant it, and that was the part that hurt the most. Her phone buzzed, a message from Noah. "They're coming hard. Don't let them tell your story for you." And she stared at the screen for a long time, then typed back, "They already have. Time to take it back." The next morning, before any press conference could be arranged, Clara opened her laptop, turned on the camera, and began recording. No makeup, no notes. Just her and the truth. 2 years ago, she began, her voice steady but raw. "I said something that I regret. I said, I don't care if it's performative. And it's true. I did say it. I meant it back then." She exhaled, the sound heavy with memory. "I was tired. I was blind. I thought leadership was about survival, about winning battles with optics and control, but I was wrong." Her eyes lifted to the lens. "Performance doesn't heal people. Presence does. And I've spent the last year trying to learn the difference." She didn't apologize in corporate language. She didn't defend herself. She didn't mention Mitchell or Northlight or reputation. She just told the truth. Simple, unpolished, undeniable. "I can't erase who I was," she said quietly, "but I can be responsible for who I am now. And if this costs me everything, then maybe it's worth it." She ended the video there, no edits, no fade out, and uploaded it herself to the Foundation's page with the caption, "For anyone who's ever been tired and changed anyway." Within an hour, the clip spread faster than any scandal. People didn't share it with outrage, they shared it with relief. Comments flooded in, "This is what accountability looks like. Finally, someone who admits they were wrong and grows. You don't lose respect for this, you earn it." By the next day, from presence over performance, trended alongside "The table is open." Teachers used the clip in classrooms. Past critics publicly retracted their words. Even journalists who'd once mocked her called it a masterclass in humility. But inside Northlight, the walls began to crack. The board issued a sterile statement distancing itself from the foundation. Sponsors pulled out of pending deals. Mitchell's faction circulated memos claiming Clara had acted unilaterally, violating investor confidence. Clara attended her final board meeting without ceremony. She arrived early, wearing the same black blazer she had worn the day she was first appointed CEO, only now it fit differently, looser somehow, like a shell she had finally outgrown. When the meeting began, Mitchell was already smiling. "I think you owe the company an explanation," he said smoothly. Clara nodded. "You're right." She placed a small folder on the table. Inside were transfer documents, already notarized. "This is my resignation," she said, "effective immediately." Mitchell blinked. "You're quitting?" "I'm stepping aside," she corrected, "and transferring my entire share of Northlight equity to the Open Table Foundation. Every dollar of it." The room went silent. Even Ruth looked stunned. "That's insane," Mitchell hissed. "You can't just—" "I can," she said evenly, "and I have." He stared at her, eyes narrowing. "You think this makes you noble? You're walking away from everything you built." Clara smiled, faint but steady. "No, I'm walking toward it." She stood, gathering her bag. "You wanted to own the company. Congratulations, it's yours. But you'll find it's a lot harder to sell when the people who made it matter are gone." Then she turned and walked out. Outside, snow was falling again, soft against the glass towers. The air smelled of iron and winter. She felt lighter than she had in years. At the foundation's modest office, Noah was waiting. He didn't ask what had happened. He already knew. She handed him a thin envelope, the transfer confirmation. "All of it?" he asked quietly. "All of it." He looked at her for a long time, then nodded. "You sure about this?" "I've never been more sure of anything," she said. "It doesn't belong to me anymore. It belongs to the table." Noah smiled, the kind that carried more faith than words. "Then we better make sure it stays open." That night, Clara walked home through streets glazed with ice and city light. The wind bit her cheeks, but she didn't hide from it. Somewhere behind her, in an office too small to hold the weight of what they had built, the foundation's sign glowed faintly in the window. The Open Table Foundation, one seat, for everyone. And for the first time in a long, long while, Clara didn't feel like she was performing. She just felt present. A year passed. Halifax Park was unrecognizable from the quiet stretch of grass it used to be. The city had turned the land over to the Open Table Foundation months earlier, and now the space had become something alive. Part garden, part gathering ground, part promise. On this late autumn afternoon, the air smelled of baked bread and pine. The sea breeze carried voices, laughter, the soft clinking of plates. Rows of picnic tables stretched across the field like a single wooden river, weaving between trees painted gold by the fading sun. People came from across the country, volunteers, teachers, children, elders from towns, whose names barely fit on the banners they carried. Halifax, Toronto, Vancouver, Saskatoon. They'd driven, flown, taken buses overnight, just to be here, to sit down together. Noah stood near the center, sleeves rolled up, passing out bowls of stew to a group of teenagers who'd come from Winnipeg. His hair was flecked with early gray now, but the same warmth lived in his smile. Nearby, Clara was arranging a stack of handwritten thank you notes from families helped by the Foundation's programs. Her once precise executive posture had softened. She looked comfortable among the noise, the chaos, the humanity of it all. Elena darted between tables, clutching a folded piece of paper. She was 11 now, taller, surer, the same spark in her eyes, but tempered by something deeper, something learned. "Dad," she called, tugging at Noah's sleeve. "It's time." He nodded. "Go ahead, sweetheart." Someone handed her the microphone, not that she needed it. The crowd quieted, hundreds of faces turning toward the little girl who had once stood on a chair to speak for her father's class. She unfolded her paper, took a breath, and began. "We belong where kindness is taught. We belong where hands meet without fear. We belong where stories aren't owned but shared. We belong here. The words floated through the park like music. Some people closed their eyes. Others simply smiled through the tears that came without warning. When Elena finished, the applause came, not as thunder, but as a wave, gentle, endless. Noah stepped forward, resting a hand on her shoulder. "That was beautiful," he whispered. She grinned. "I learned from the best." As dusk settled, lanterns were lit along the tables. The light shimmered on every face, black, white, brown, young, old, no separation, no hierarchy, just belonging. Noah turned to Clara, who was standing a few feet away, watching the glow spread across the park. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, he said quietly, "We built a table." Clara met his gaze, her voice soft but certain, and kept every seat open. The wind carried their words into the crowd, folding them into the sound of laughter and distant guitar strings. Children ran between tables, chasing fireflies that hadn't yet learned the season was almost over. A few of Noah's students from Eastwood served slices of pie from a cart someone had painted with the words, "Hope feeds itself." Clara sat down beside Ruth Delaney, who had made the trip despite her health. The older woman chuckled, holding her cup of cider. "I never thought I'd live to see a boardroom without walls," she said. Clara smiled. "You helped build it." Ruth shook her head. "No, dear, I just voted for the right kind of chaos." Nearby, Mitchell's name was never mentioned. His silence had become its own defeat. The corporation he once worshipped had faded into irrelevance, while the movement he tried to kill grew roots in every province. As the evening deepened, a thin flurry of snow began to fall, the first of the year. The crowd didn't move indoors. They lifted their faces to the sky, letting the flakes dissolve against their skin. Someone started humming, "Lean on Me," and soon, 100 voices joined in, low and imperfect and completely human. Noah looked around, the park, the tables, the laughter, the steam rising from cups, the lives that had touched and tangled because of one mistaken seat years ago. He exhaled, a long, steady breath that carried both exhaustion and peace. Clara watched him, the corners of her eyes glistening. For a second, the noise of the world seemed far away, just wind, children's laughter, the rustle of pine branches overhead. Noah turned toward her. "You ever think we'd end up here?" She shook her head slowly. "Not like this. But maybe this was always where we were supposed to sit." He smiled. "Then let's never leave the table." Snow thickened, softening the edges of everything. The last sound before darkness took the park was the laughter of children echoing through the cold, mingling with the wind. A sound so pure it seemed a promise that something good, something lasting, had truly begun. Elena's voice came later, calm, steady, older now. "Dad once told me, power isn't what you hold, it's what you hand over. We didn't fix the world, but we built a place to begin." The screen faded to black. Then, slowly, white letters appeared over the faint sound of wind and laughter. Open Table Foundation, Halifax, Toronto, Vancouver, and beneath it, the final line lingered like a heartbeat. "The table is still open,